Most people think my job's insane. Honestly, they're probably right. When people talk about dangerous professions, they usually mention logging, commercial fishing, or even construction. Those jobs earn their reputation. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and you're fucked. Or hell, dead. Me? I always found myself drawn to danger. Maybe it's the adrenaline. Maybe it's because some part of me enjoys standing in places most people would never willingly go. You can learn a lot about a person from the work that they choose to do. For me, that work is commercial diving. Most folks hear that and assume it's terrifying. Being dropped into cold, dark water, hundreds of feet from the surface, while surrounded by machinery that could crush you without warning. Doesn't sound exactly appealing to the average person. The funny thing is, I find it relaxing. Down there, the world becomes quiet. The noise of everyday life, the wife complaining, it disappears beneath the water. It's just me, my equipment, and whatever job needs doing. I usually have music playing through my helmet while I work on oil rigs, ship holes, intake structures, and all sorts of underwater machinery. After years in the profession, I thought I'd seen everything that the depths could throw at me. I was wrong. Because in all my years of commercial diving, nothing, and I mean nothing, came close to making me soil my dive suit the way I almost did during a contract at the Hoover Dam. The water was murky that morning. Visibility couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 feet. My helmet lamp carved a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating clouds of suspended sediment drifting lazily through the reservoir. I remember feeling uneasy almost immediately. Not fear. Fear implies you've identified the threat. What I felt was the discomfort of being observed by something that hadn't quite revealed itself yet. The sensation settled between my shoulder blades and refused to leave. Something was down there with me. Heavy emphasis on something. Because there's nothing in this world that should have been sharing those depths with me. The feeling was irrational enough that, like an idiot, I ignored it. Then, I saw the marks. They scored the concrete face of the dam in long, jagged trails. These weren't little scratches left by debris or equipment. They stretched several feet across the wall and bit deep enough into the surface to expose steel beneath. I stopped swimming and stared. What unsettled me most wasn't their size. It was how familiar they looked. Almost human. Or at least made by something trying very hard to be human. 5 long gouges ran parallel to one another through decades of algae and sediment, climbing vertically along the dam, before disappearing into darkness above. I keyed my radio. Somebody's gonna have to explain how these ended up on a wall. The response was laughter. They thought I was joking. Honestly, so did I. I snapped a few photographs and continued downward. That's when I found the first handprint. 5 fingers, human proportions, pressed against the concrete nearly 30 feet below the surface. Then, another, and another. Soon my lamp was finding them everywhere. Hundreds, thousands maybe. Handprints layered over one another, as if something had spent years climbing the face of the Hoover Dam. My breathing quickened. The sound echoed loudly inside my helmet. There had to be a reasonable explanation. There always had been before. Then, my lamp caught movement. A figure, standing motionless on the reservoir floor. I nearly inhaled my own tongue. At first, I assumed it was another diver. The silhouette was roughly human-sized. 2 arms, 2 legs, standing upright in the darkness. But that didn't make any sense. No diver would be down there alone. Not without communications. Not without a support crew. Not without lights. This thing had nothing. It simply stood at the edge of visibility, motionless and watching. I blinked. It was gone. Immediately, I radioed the surface. "Confirm, I'm the only diver in the water?" A moment later, the reply came. "Just you, Maxwell. No unauthorized personnel, secondary dive teams, nobody else in the reservoir. I should have ascended right then. Instead, I kept working. I convinced myself my eyes were playing tricks on me. Fatigue, bad visibility, too much coffee before the dive. Stubbornness is a common flaw in my profession. God knows I've got plenty of it. I was raised by a father who thought every problem could be solved by manning up. A strange shadow wasn't about to sabotage my paycheck. A few minutes later, I noticed something that truly frightened me. The safety line connecting me to the surface had gone slack. Completely slack. That should never happen. There's always currents, movement, tension. The line should constantly carry resistance. I turned my lamp toward it. The rope disappeared into darkness behind me. Then it moved. Not drifted. Moved. Something farther down the line had pulled it. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I followed the rope with my eyes until my beam reached its end. Something was holding it. A hand. A pale human hand emerging from the darkness. Its fingers wrapped around the line. Then, a second hand appeared. And then, a face. God, I wish I hadn't seen the face. Its skin was swollen and waterlogged, stretched tight across features that almost resembled a person. Almost. The eyes were too large, too dark, like something hauled up from the deepest part of the ocean. Then it smiled. The safety line jerked violently. I screamed into the radio. The thing released the rope and vanished downward with impossible speed. One moment it was there. The next, it had been swallowed by the darkness. Surface control immediately ordered my ascent. For once in my life, I didn't argue. Halfway to the surface, I made the mistake that still haunts my dreams. I looked down. There wasn't just one. Dozens of pale figures stood along the face of the dam, motionless, watching. Their silhouettes clung to the concrete like barnacles that had learned how to imitate people. And every single one of them was staring upward, toward me, toward the surface. I reached the top in record time. The crew blamed nitrogen narcosis, stress, exhaustion. The photographs and film were reviewed. Most showed nothing unusual, just dark water and concrete. Except for one. The final clip from the helmet's recorder. The engineers never found an explanation for it. You can clearly see me inspecting the intake structure. You can clearly see the beam from my helmet lamp. And standing directly behind me is another diver. No safety markings, equipment, or even an air hose. Just a pale figure staring directly into the camera. The worst part? The timestamp showed the photograph had been taken 6 minutes before I noticed anything in the water. Meaning, that thing had already been following me for most of the dive. A few days later, men in black suits came to speak with me. And that's about as much as I'm legally allowed to say. I retired shortly afterward. People think I'm crazy. Walking away from a 6-figure career because I saw strange pale figures underwater. He must be nuts. Maybe I am. But every time I hear reports about water levels dropping at the Hoover Dam, I find myself wondering what happens when the reservoir finally shrinks enough. Because if those things were standing on the wall, 60 feet underwater, sooner or later, they won't be underwater anymore. What the hell were those things?